ghosts real? I'm Robert Joe, and you're about to find out right now. I Wouldn't Go In There starts now.
I started my duty by patrolling all the areas I had to cover that night. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. I was too scared to look.
I love stories like this. Ghost stories.
A lot of torture places, a lot of people die there. We heard a voice
About places we're not supposed to go. We're warned not to go. But I'm no ghost hunter. The fear, superstition, always hides a bigger story. A true story. What really happened here? And if you knew, would you still go there? My name is Robert Joe. I'm a blogger and urban explorer. My theory is that whenever you find a place with lots of ghost stories, it's often because a true horror or tragedy inspired them. Penang, Malaysia was no exception. I found one curious story at a former British World War II fort on Penang Island. Today, it's been converted into a museum.
I've been working at the War Museum for about 11 years. I'm a night patrolman. It was exactly 11:15 that night. As I looked up at the sky, I saw the full moon. I started my duty by patrolling all the areas I had to cover that night.
Kawasan-kawasan perlu saya buat rondaan. Saya kena kawal selia. Kemudian saya
Later, I went to the alley below the control tower.
Bangunan menara kawalan. Kemudian saya terpandang.
When I looked up,
ada sosok.
I saw a figure looking at me.
Perhatikan saya. Saya
He was holding a long rifle with a bayonet.
Muncung senapan panjang, bayonet dan juga samurai.
And a samurai sword.
Dan saya semakin
I wondered why he was there.
Malam-malam begini tiba-tiba ada seorang yang. Jadi saya semakin.
I became nervous.
Kemudian saya terus.
Then I went upstairs to check if what I saw was real.
Dan benar. Saya terkejut.
I was shocked.
Di mana yang saya
What I had seen earlier wasn't there.
Kemudian
and then I realized something wasn't right.
Rocky the night watchman was clearly disturbed by what he thought he saw. Even though I don't believe in ghosts, in my experience, stories like Rocky's don't just surface out of thin air. They usually have an element of truth. A truth based on events from a forgotten past. The British built this fort in the 1930s, only to abandon it to the Japanese at the onset of World War II. What could have happened there before it became a museum? I hit the streets. All around me were symbols of Penang's long history. A trading hub since the 18th century. The Chinese, Arabs, Indians, Portuguese, Dutch, and British. They'd all come here, creating a sort of Southeast Asian melting pot. And they'd all brought with them their own beliefs in the supernatural.
Malaysian beliefs and spirits anyway.
I was meeting Nazruddin Rahman, a local TV personality. He was well acquainted with Penang's ghost stories and urban legends.
Malaysia is a melting pot of cultures. Of course, we've got the Chinese community and Indian community here in Malaysia, Sikh, and they've all got different manifestations of spirits.
So, here in Penang, what are the ghost stories like?
Loads of stories. From old mansions that were abandoned to Japanese ghosts marching in the night. I'm going to take you one right now. There's an interesting love story behind it.
Okay, cool.
Structure's a bit unstable, so we'll be careful. Your reputation keeps people away.
Naz took me to Ralau Villa, rumored to be one of Penang's most haunted houses.
After you, sir.
Of course. It was built way back in 1930 by the wealthiest man in Penang. Right, urban legend has it that once upon a time, back in the day, a wealthy family from Hong Kong had come here to stay. And the wealthy man's daughter fell in love with a poor local man here in Penang. Forbidden love. And of course, because it was forbidden, the daughter decided to commit suicide right here in this place. And ever since then, many strange happenings, according to urban legend, of course.
Do local people come here? Are they afraid of this place?
Places like this would invite spirits to reside from within. And generally, the local populace would stay away, but I don't get a negative feeling. Not a positive one either, but maybe a little bit of sadness.
It was a tale of star-crossed lovers that sounded straight out of Shakespeare. An abandoned mansion, an abandoned fort. Whatever happened in places like these often got tangled up in urban legends and superstition. What struck me about Rocky's paranormal encounter were the details. The samurai sword, bayonet rifle, left no doubt as to the Phantom's Japanese origins. The British built the fort some ways from the town, and the hill where it stood was nicknamed Bukit Hantu, or Ghost Hill by some.
Penang seems full of ghost stories, but Rocky wasn't afraid of ghosts. He was afraid of a specific ghost. I want to know what he saw and why he was so terrified. And also why the locals call this place Ghost Hill. Makes you wonder what really happened there.
I wanted to find out what some of the people here knew.
Of a place called Bukit Hantu? No. Bukit Hantu? Never? You know,
maybe it wasn't as notorious as its name suggested.
Excuse me, do you know where Bukit Hantu is?
Somewhere around 5 kilometers from here.
5 kilometers? That way?
That way.
Okay.
They call it the War Museum.
I'll look for the War Museum.
War Museum.
All right, thank you.
Ghost Town.
Okay, cheers. Thank you. I finally made it to the foot of what is apparently Bukit Hantu. Oddly enough, it was really hard to find. One gentleman did finally know where it was and was able to point me in the right direction. So I'm going to go up and see if it has anything to do with Rocky's story. Thanks. What's this? Oh, great, thanks. According to this map, this here is the observation post. Rocky saw the ghost. It must be up on that top floor there from, I think, around this position. He said he came around and tried to turn on a light switch. I'm going to assume it's this one over here. All right, let's go look for Rocky's ghost. So that right down there is where Rocky would have been. This would be theoretically the point of view of whatever ghost Rocky said he saw, right here on top of this observation port. Your question is, what was it that was here that terrified Rocky so much?
The way Rocky described this samurai sword-wielding ghost, it was clearly a Japanese soldier from the Second World War. The Japanese did take over this fort after the British abandoned it. But what did they use it for? Maybe the answer lay hidden in these bunkers and tunnels.
Oh, wow. There must have been prisoners that were kept here. And that's what I imagine this thing is. It looks like one of the figures from the Abu Ghraib pictures that came out on the internet.
The prison cell was just the beginning. The pictures, torture instruments, and plaques all gave the impression the fort was some kind of Japanese garrison during World War II. But set amongst that were some amusement park-style decorations. The museum seemed one part history, another part fantasy. Question was, how would I separate fact from fiction?
So according to this placard, this space here was where a soldier by the name of Suzuki beheaded POWs, a Japanese soldier.
Was this executioner named Suzuki linked to the ghost Rocky thought he saw? Maybe Colonel Suzuki was some kind of boogeyman. I spoke to the museum's owner, Johari Shafi.
So what did the Japanese use this fort for?
Japanese, on 16 December 1941, Japanese invade Penang, and then they turned this place, or this fort, become a POW camp for the first one in northern Malaya at that time.
Really?
Yes.
According to Johari, the Japanese had turned the fort from a British outpost to a place of detention, and even worse.
They torture people here, at this room.
Right here?
Yeah. Like, for example, pulling the nail, then take out the eyes. This is a normal practice by Suzuki and his people here.
So who was Suzuki?
Suzuki is a famous executioner during the Japanese occupation here.
So Suzuki would execute people here?
Yes.
At this fort?
Yes. Malay, Chinese, or Indian, or European.
Johari described Suzuki as a colonel who carried a samurai sword wherever he went. That sounded like the character in Rocky's ghost story. I pressed Johari about the hauntings at the museum.
You must ask Mr. Rocky.
I came to Penang, Malaysia, to investigate rumors of hauntings at a World War II museum. Johari, the museum's owner, told me a Japanese colonel named Suzuki had been a ruthless executioner here. Rocky the Night Watch said he had seen an apparition holding a rifle and samurai sword. Was there a connection between Suzuki and Rocky's ghost? I took another look at Rocky's testimony for more clues.
Suddenly, I heard footsteps.
Orang berjalan. Terus saya meluru ke
I ran
bawah,
down from the control tower
menuju ke
to
arah
see where the footsteps came from.
suara tapak kasut. Saya
I was panicking
panik.
as I reached for the light switch.
Perlu saya menyalakan switch lampu di sana. Dia berdiri
Suddenly,
di sebelah.
he was standing in front of me. He looked really fierce.
Berpandangan garang. Saya pastikan
He was in the uniform of a Japanese soldier.
ala tentara Jepun. Saya melihat beberapa
I thought
bajunya
he must be someone of high rank.
seorang pegawai yang berpangkat tinggi. Apabila dia pegang
As he held his samurai sword, he asked me to come closer. I was too scared to look.
I tracked down Rocky to get more details about the ghost he believed he saw that night.
So he was right up there?
Iya. Nampak
I saw
sesuatu.
something up there.
Did you know who the ghost was?
I was confident he was a Japanese army officer. His name was Colonel Suzuki.
Suzuki. Rocky's ghost was the same colonel that allegedly tortured and executed people at the fort. And apparently, there was even a photograph of him.
So which one is Suzuki?
Iya. Yang ini ialah
That's General Tomoyuki Yamashita in his black boots. Directly behind him is Colonel Suzuki.
Okay, so that's Yamashita, though, the guy who was in charge of Singapore, Malaya?
Iya.
And that guy behind him is Suzuki,
Yes,
the one with his face hidden. Looking at Rocky's picture, General Yamashita's face was clearly visible, but the person next to him, there's no way of knowing who that was. I don't see how Rocky could guess that was Suzuki. Something about the story just seems off.
I needed to find out if Colonel Suzuki had even existed. And if so, what had he done to evoke such lingering fear? I headed to the local archives. I wanted the truth about the Japanese occupation of Penang and this infamous colonel. The Japanese invaded Malaya in December 1941. They worked their way down the peninsula, finally taking Penang on December 19th after 8 days of intense bombing. They would occupy Malaya for 4 years. Schools in Penang remained open, but classes were taught only in Japanese. Any perceived anti-Japanese sentiment was not tolerated. Over the course of the occupation, an estimated 100,000 died in Malaya. In my research, I found shocking accounts of atrocities, and the name of one of the persons responsible for the extreme brutality in Penang. His name, Tadashi Suzuki. Suzuki was real. I tracked down someone who survived the Japanese occupation. He still lived in Butterworth, across the strait from Penang Island, and I figured he might know something about this Suzuki. Robert David had vivid memories of life under the Japanese.
You're walking along the road, suddenly the Japanese truck will come, catch you, put you in the truck and take you away. You don't know what happened actually. Your husband has gone out, Your brother has gone out, he said, come back. So day to day, you lived in fear. You really don't know what will happen to you.
Let me show you this picture. At the museum, we're told this person was Suzuki, a man by the name of Suzuki. Do you know who Suzuki is?
Yeah, he was a CPO, but was chief police officer.
This person here?
Has he long hair? He had long hair up to here. But he had shoulder-length hair.
How do you know what he looks like?
I have seen him.
You saw Suzuki?
I have seen him many times. He's in Butterworth. I'm in Butterworth. We see him everywhere.
This was a surprise. Someone who had actually seen Suzuki in the flesh. But there was one important twist. Mr. David said Suzuki was never on Penang Island at the fort, but rather in Butterworth on the mainland.
Was Suzuki in Penang Island? Was he ever?
No, Butterworth.
Never in Penang?
No.
Were you afraid of him?
Sure, everybody was afraid of him.
Mr. David told me Suzuki had been the chief of the Japanese garrison police, who terrorized the people of Butterworth.
Mr. David, what was this building?
During the war, the Japanese occupied it. This is where the garrison police was under Suzuki, CPO Suzuki.
The Japanese had commandeered the building, and it was from here that Suzuki controlled Butterworth with sheer brutality.
From here, they took the young boy to have him executed.
For 3 months.
Mr. David had actually witnessed Suzuki behead a young man.
This place was an open field, and there was nothing here. It was all open. I was cycling, so I was almost reaching a place when garrison police, local people under Suzuki, they just stopped me and said, go here. So I saw a big crowd when I came here, and every one of them apparently was forced to come to witness this execution. So I was in the crowd. There I saw this boy kneeling at the head of the grave, which was already dug and ready. There Suzuki was there. He took out his sword from the sheath and raised it once and lowered it. Raised it twice and lowered it. And the third time, he shouted, "Batsai!" And the head fell into the grave, and the boy's body lurched into the grave. For some time, I couldn't even walk. I just stood. As all others, they stood there like statues until Suzuki went away. Then they all slowly dispersed.
My investigation was turning into a true history mystery. Robert David, who had been a young man in Butterworth during the Japanese occupation, said Suzuki was frighteningly real, but didn't believe he was ever at the fort on Penang Island, but was actually the head of the Japanese garrison police in Butterworth. So part of the story at the War Museum appeared accurate. Suzuki was a murderer, and his brutal acts were still haunting the memories of those who witnessed them. But what did the Japanese actually do at the fort during their occupation of Penang? The way the museum blended fact and fiction made it hard to know for certain. I headed back to try and piece the puzzle together. I'm back at the War Museum. It's actually a little creepier at night. The complete lack of light helps, certainly. And the fact that one misstep and I could tumble down hills. Yeah, there we go. Everything's got a little bit more of that creepy patina. Jesus.
I just heard an extremely, extremely loud noise coming from up there somewhere. Jesus, oh God. I think the noise came up from around this area. These stairs. It just sounded like a cannon, really. Okay, it definitely came from up here. I think we're getting closer. The noise came from somewhere over here. Whoa. You guys scared the shit out of me. What? What was that?
This is a fake cannon. This is for the night tour. This.
I'm curious to see just what this night tour is all about.
Indra Gunawan, the night tour guide, gave me his take on the place. Indra reiterated that the Japanese had done horrible things at the fort. I had no doubt the Japanese occupation in Penang had been brutal. But after what I'd learned from Robert David, I was questioning what atrocities, if any, had taken place here. I guess the War Museum was intended as more of a symbol for the brutality of the occupation than an actual place of torture.
What is this?
So they cut the prisoner, they cut the head of the prisoner, and then after they cut the head will hang here. And the dead body, they will keep in that building. The red light, you see there? The red light.
Yeah.
What they use for the mortuary.
So this is a representation of the Japanese cutting off.
When they cut the people here.
Well, I couldn't help but notice that you have these big monsters with glowing red eyes.
Yeah. You get information from workers in this museum. When they start to clean up this area, they see like this guy. So he can design how they see the time.
So when you open these, the workers apparently saw these things.
Proof that history really can inspire the dark corners of our imagination. All in the name of amusement, I suppose.
Whoa. So this is meant to be some sort of prison?
Yeah, this is like a prison design.
And that's meant to be some sort of giant tarantula?
Yeah, they get torture.
Every display had an explanation, but many seemed more like B-movie entertainment than real history.
Some spiders for paper.
So spider torture.
Yeah.
Okay.
I had no doubt that the real Suzuki inspired some of the museum's horror stories. But there was no proof that Suzuki was even there, or that the Japanese used it for torture and executions.
How did the museum collect the information? How did the museum research this information?
My own, So him going to anywhere to stay up this is secret, especially to England, what happened here, how many costs they make in this, everything. Anywhere to learn, so we may ask also workers here we also learn from him.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it was all independently researched.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, I'm starting to get the full picture now. War Museum isn't a war museum so much as it's an amusement park that's called War Museum, that's set in a historical place, with real artifacts and fun stuff to do, but no clear line separating one from the other.
During World War II, under the Japanese occupation, Penang was a base for Nazi U-boats for operations in the Indian Ocean. I wouldn't go in there. Stay tuned to the National Geographic Channel. Georgetown's rich collection of historical buildings remained relatively unscathed during the Japanese occupation. I Wouldn't Go In There continues now on the National Geographic Channel.
I came to Penang, Malaysia to investigate the history behind a ghost story. A ruthless Japanese soldier was said to haunt a former World War II fort. The ghost that the night guard believed he saw was based on a real person, a Japanese military police officer named Tadashi Suzuki. This Suzuki was no ghost, but a very real monster. While Suzuki never executed anyone at the fort, he did commit horrible crimes elsewhere in Penang. Suzuki seemed larger than life, a boogeyman or symbol for the true horrors that took place here. I sought out local historian Clement Liang.
Hey, Clement.
Hi.
I'm Robert.
Yeah, welcome.
Nice to meet you. I'm trying to find out information about either an executioner or some sort of colonel in the Japanese army, perhaps, by the name of Suzuki. Do you know anything about him?
During the war, there was a guy called Tadashi Suzuki, and he was the head of the police force at Butterworth. He had this reputation of chopping off people's heads.
Clement confirmed what Robert David told me. Tadashi Suzuki was in Butterworth. But what about the fort on Penang Island?
I heard Suzuki would torture and execute people at the fort. Is that true?
Not that I'm aware of. I have not read any record that he went to the fort and tortured people there. That fort was quite a distance away from town, and there's no reason why they need to bring the prisoners all the way there.
So is Suzuki responsible for all of the tortures and executions that are attributed to him?
Well, there are quite a number of villains. I would say Suzuki was just one of them.
Then Clement spoke of something much larger, something bigger than Suzuki's crimes.
The real massacre that happened was during 1942. In Chinese, we call it Suk Ching. During the campaigns, it's just like people being rounded up and, brought to some place where they were massacred en masse. And I think that is even worse than what Suzuki did.
Clement confirmed that Suzuki was never at the fort. It was too far away from population centers to be of practical use to the Japanese military police. But as head of the Japanese garrison police in Butterworth, he did play a role in a much larger terror that gripped Penang. Clement mentioned the Suk Ching. In English, the phrase meant to cleanse, to purge. Was the Suk Ching the real ghost of World War II still haunting Penang Island? I tracked down another survivor. Mr. Lim agreed to meet me at the anti-war memorial.
Could you tell me about the occupation?
One morning I was bathing. Suddenly I heard bombing, boom, like that. And then, then I look out through the window. I saw dark clouds there. And then later, we have hundreds of people running along the streets and back lanes, And
that was the start of the war for you?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like there was a pretty heavy Japanese presence in your daily life. Was it a violent time?
The heads were chopped off by the Japanese at the police headquarters in Penang Road. The head was chopped off, and then they were hung up in front of the market the next morning.
So you remember seeing heads hanging from poles?
Yes. I saw the head hanging there. I was so scared,
What kind of people were getting killed?
Mostly Chinese. All the people, thousands of them, lined up the whole streets, taken away.
The Penang Anti-War Monument recorded 5,000 people killed in the Suk Ching. Mr. Lim witnessed what happened to some of these victims. Suzuki was just one among many engaged in this organized murder of Chinese civilians. There was a deeper history to this Japanese animosity towards the Chinese.
And then it happened. That which is stronger than stone walls had at last been born in China. The will to resist.
In 1937, nearly 200,000 Chinese rebelled against their Japanese occupiers in China. The Japanese wanted to ensure there wasn't another Chinese rebellion in Malaya. So they mapped out a cruel strategy entitled Implementation Guideline for Manipulating Overseas Chinese. It called for eliminating anyone who failed to obey or cooperate. I wanted to know how far this elimination strategy had gone here in Penang. The Penang Anti-War Memorial listed 4 mass grave sites where victims of the Suk Ching were buried. But then I found something odd. An account of a 5th mass grave, a place called Rifle Range. It wasn't listed on the memorial. I was expecting a monument for victims of the Suk Ching.
I'm looking for mass graves from the Suk Ching massacre. Are they here?
No, there is no mass grave for the Suk Ching victims here. A few who died from explosions are buried here, but there is no mass grave. I have a few records here. They indicate that there are individual graves, but no mass grave.
But there's supposed to be a mass grave at Rifle Range.
No. This is Batu Gantung, not Rifle Range.
So I came here looking for mass graves, and it turns out I came to the wrong place. The bodies aren't in this cemetery. They're at that apartment complex over there. That's Rifle Range. And so I'm going to head over there and see what else I can find out.
The thought crossed my mind. Could an entire housing estate have been built over a mass grave? A huge cemetery abutted a rather run-down housing block. But where was the mass burial site? I was given the name of an eyewitness who could tell me about the mass grave.
Uncle Tan, I heard you could tell me about the mass graves here at Rifle Range. What do you remember about them?
Before Japanese come, and then 他埋了很多人这里，他打死了很多平民啊。所以啊，这里啊，这个地区啊，埋了很多这个人。
Were these bodies from the Suk Ching massacre?
Yeah, Suk Ching 啊。Yeah. 日本人肃清的时候，是了，他们没有讲道理的，他就是这样埋，打死了就这样埋下去了。
So you saw the bones?
Yeah， 因为我们刚搬进来的时候啊，我们来看屋子的时候啊，他这个屋子有那个拖拉机啊，挖起来。挖起来我们看到了，所以我们看到很多骨头啊。
How long ago was this?
50 years.
50 years ago, wow. So the 60s?
Yeah.
1960s.
Yeah.
So I just spoke with Uncle Tan, and it turns out that there were mass graves here at these Rifle Range apartments. Where the bodies were moved, I don't know, but they were here.
Two brave investigators.
I came to Penang, Malaysia, because of an old World War II fort that was said to be haunted. I believe the haunting was a myth, but it was based on a very real monster, Japanese police officer Tadashi Suzuki. Yet he was just one man involved in the systematic killing of Chinese civilians here. It was known as the Suk Ching, the Purge. I identified 5 mass graves from the Suk Ching, including one I investigated called Rifle Range. But I had a feeling this was just the tip of the iceberg. The perpetrators had no interest in keeping records of those they killed. To get to the truth, I'd have to talk to survivors and their families. I met a local historian, Andrew Huang, whose father had lived through the Sukching.
Why did you ask to meet here?
Well, Bukit Dambao is where we are. This was the site of two mass graves. So they came and they dug up a pit. In the pit they found 250 skulls.
It was right around here?
Yeah, well, it's somewhere down there.
Incredibly, here were more Sukching mass graves, not mentioned in any official records or memorials.
So how many people were executed during the Sukching?
In Penang, on the island, 5,000, probably more. They basically added up the various places, 1,000 bodies in Rifle Range, about 1,000 bodies in the Penang prison. They were buried on site, you see, and in the prison grounds itself. And then there was about, maybe in Kum Hill, there's another location, there's supposed to be a couple of thousand there. There were also others at Batu Feringhi by the beach. And in those bodies, we don't even know whether they were buried or they were thrown into the sea. 5,000, I think, is a very conservative figure.
During the 1946 war crimes trial in Penang, a gravedigger testified to burying 1,000 bodies. It was only after this shocking revelation that the British exhumed the bodies.
So if bodies here were exhumed, why weren't the bodies at Rifle Range exhumed?
Oh, they were, but 10 years after the war crimes trials, in 1956. And that was because they wanted to develop the area to turn it into public housing. And it was going to be multi-storied public housings. So in the process of excavating, preparing the land, they discovered these bones. Obviously they had to stop work and figure out what to do with all these bones.
It was starting to make sense. The bodies weren't under those apartment blocks. They were discovered because of them, because the site had been excavated. It was a pure chance discovery.
So in the end, the local authorities had no choice. They had to get it all cremated, and the ashes were put in boxes and buried in various cemeteries.
So why wasn't Rifle Range on the list of exhumations on the memorial?
We're talking of different years. The earlier exhumations, when they were interested in locating bodies of Japanese victims, that was all done in 46 and 47. But this is 56. 10 years had gone by.
So the bodies at Rifle Range were discovered after the anti-war memorial had been built. That explained its omission. During the chaos of war and its aftermath, statistics are the last thing on many people's minds. And those who commit war crimes have no interest in having the details revealed. Eventually, some of those responsible for killing innocent people were held accountable. On 31st August 1946, 32 Japanese stood before the British military in the Penang war crimes trial. But one war criminal was notably absent, Tadashi Suzuki.
Suzuki Tadashi died in April 1945, 1st of April 1945. He was on a ship going back home to Japan. So the ship was the HS Awamaru. And HS Awamaru was torpedoed by the USS Queenfish, I think. It's just an American submarine. He was drowned during the incident.
Getting the full picture of the Sukching massacre seemed impossible. The Rifle Range mass grave had been exhumed years after the anti-war memorial was built. And now I was standing where the Japanese had buried even more. Andrew Huang mentioned more bodies may have been tossed into the sea. There was no way to know for certain how many had been killed. It was through Suzuki that I had begun to understand the true horror that had gripped Penang. He became the symbol of a time of absolute terror, the Sukching massacre. Some 800 of the Sukching's victims in Penang had been laid to rest at a memorial. There was no way of knowing the actual number of innocent people killed. There were no records. Those unaccounted for were what some people here call lost souls. To check out my blog and some exclusive extras, visit iwgit.com. What's my next haunted location in Asia? Tune in next week to find out.
In the next episode of I Wouldn't Go In There.
I'd heard about some strange sightings in Thailand's ancient capital, Ayutthaya.
He looked at us with his red eyes and disappeared into the pagoda.
Let's get down there.
I Wouldn't Go In There. Next Friday night at 11 on the National Geographic Channel. Too brave.